Hello. Oh, actually, my husband did that thing where you tape the camera.
Oh, you
Oh.
tape it. Oh.
Classic.
I was
Hackers.
like,
Hackers can
you
come in.
would do that. I mean, I did see the movie Snowden, and it did get me a
Oh,
little bit
yeah.
freaked out.
Oh,
That's
for
great.
that reason, literally.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazier than we thought, apparently. I don't care as much, but he's the kind that takes the extra precaution, which is good for my lifestyle.
Yeah, so
There we
There we are.
go.
there we
Ah, cool.
are. Woo.
Nice
Okay.
to
I was
see
like, it
you.
came off pretty easy. I don't know.
That's why I thought you were still like hacking at it to get it off.
And then we're flying up to Arley Beach and then road tripping up to Cairns,
Where are
Ah,
you landing?
Sydney. So
Cool.
that's
So you're
where our
gonna head
friend,
up all the way up to Cairns.
yeah.
Wow, that's
that's cool.
awesome.
That,
Well, if you stop on the Gold Coast, yeah, look me up, man. I'll take you for one of the spots here, whatever. It'd be awesome.
Nice. That'd be great.
Yeah.
how long?
It's like my favorite friend. So I think we're gonna have a blast. Like, never even been sort of angry at each other for anything.
Oh,
So
that's
it's
awesome.
gonna
Yeah,
be
that's
great.
so cool.
Did
And
you?
Whit Sundays is so beautiful though. That area of
Yeah.
early. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, that
It's
was where our friend said, she's like, "You're going to Cairns?" Because when we first booked it, we only had we were, I knew that I wanted to fly back from Cairns on the same day we flew home, so it wouldn't be an extra day of traveling. And so I just got a return flight from there, and we're like, we'll figure out how we're getting there later. I had no idea it was like 24-hour drive. I was
yeah.
just like, oh yeah, it's just right up there. But we used to let couch surfers stay all the time. So we had people in and out, like people that were just like on couchsurfing.org and that were just like in town for the night, maybe even a week, and we'd just like let them crash in on the couch or an extra room. So we met a lot of Aussies that way though.
Ah,
And
that's
uh
Oh,
cool.
cool.
and I always liked them the best. So
Oh, nice. Crazy bunch.
yeah, for sure.
Well, hopefully you end up liking South Africans after this podcast because we're
Oh yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, I know
yeah.
South Africa's my favorite accent.
Okay, that's
Oh
good.
really?
So um, I am friends with
Uh,
two South Africans. I love it for some reason. A lot of
I've never.
South Africans question me on that, but Americans don't. They're like, "Oh yeah, South
Oh
African
yeah,
is a
it's
good
so.
one." But every time I say it to a South African, they're like, "What?"
What? Out of all of them?
Yeah.
One
Melissa,
second.
did Gareth break up there for a moment?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. You know what?
I
I'm
wasn't
gonna.
sure if it was me or that's what I just wanted to check. Because I'm in Australia and you know how good the internet is here.
Yeah. I'm gonna. If you can just give me like 2 minutes or whatever, I'm just gonna go reset my Wi-Fi just in case it is on the side. Okay. So, you guys can
Okay,
chat and
cool.
I'll call back. Okay. Cheers.
No worries,
Okay.
man.
Sorry, this is gonna be a weird editing process for you guys.
No, that's
Sorry.
cool. The cool thing is like you
100%.
can edit it. That's the good thing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, yeah, and it's so. I mean, I'm sure. Like, I think my Wi-Fi is also really playing up. So I apologize for that if it's hard to to hear what I'm saying or there's a delay in it because it seems like there is just by the way you guys are looking at me when I talk.
It's okay. Well, it's
Ooh. What's up, Gareth?
Hey, Gregos, how you, my man? What's happening, buddy?
Oh, not much, my man. How's it going? How's your day been?
Yeah, it's been good. Been good. We had a cool podcast last night, quite late, and woke up this morning quite excited to chat to you and do this intro and discussion. And how's your day
Yeah,
work?
yeah, very good, thanks. Had a good day, and what did you have for brekkie this morning? See, you had a munch in there a moment ago.
I'm a creature of habits, and I generally have a bit of porridge with some banana and water, and that's pretty much it. But and I have that most mornings because I just love it. And yeah, what about you?
So that sounds pretty yummy, actually, to be honest. I had a big bowl of roast veg, and yeah, actually really good. There's some veg and a little bit of fish tonight, and yeah, it was actually really good. Just very basic. But the nice thing is, generally speaking, I don't have to think too much about like my weight and that kind of thing. And not only that, I think it's really important to be really conscientious about what we're putting in our mouths. Obviously, we've had lots of discussions about this, but I don't think I overthink it in any way, which I'm very grateful for. But I think a lot of people do. What do you think? How do you sort of think about your food when you're preparing it and eating it?
I think it's such an interesting topic, like the relationship people have with their food, and it's so prevalent, like especially in this day and age with social media and people like posting how they look, their bodies and stuff like that, and the food they're eating and everything, and therefore it sort of more accentuated the actual relationship we have with food. Personally, I feel like I have a fat body, and therefore I've had to kind of like watch what I eat over the years. But over the last couple of years, my relationship has changed a lot when I started eating like a lot less meat, and I just find my weight is seriously easy to maintain these days. But it's only through trial and error that's happened. But my whole mindset with it hasn't like really impacted me a lot. And we spoke about it a lot in this podcast today with Melissa around bulimia, and I think it's something that a lot of people actually suffer from, and it's not necessarily spoken about too much because it's one of those taboo things, and it's strange because so many people suffer about it, but we don't speak about it. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, Gareth, I totally agree with you. I think eating disorders, obviously there's some kind of a continuum that one can talk about when we discuss an eating disorder, but there is a continuum, and I think sometimes if you just constantly feeling chubby, and it can be quite a simple thing where you might be on that sort of spectrum, and maybe you just had someone telling you look a bit chubby when you were younger or something like that, and it can trigger that sort of repetitive feeling in your mind, or that self-doubt, and that could be sort of the start of a problem later on. And I think it is really prevalent, and it's very harmful. I think it's people end up really feeling ashamed and unhappy within themselves, maybe as a result of something initially, and then obviously due to the eating disorder, which is really sad. But Melissa is someone that dealt with an eating disorder, and she really had to figure out her own path within it. And one of her real techniques of just getting over struggling with this for so long was just being able to finally speak about it, be open about it. And I think that was a big lesson for us, Gareth.
Absolutely. It's so interesting, like when you think about everybody in the world, right? Generally, we all suffer from a lot of the same things, but we never ever talk about it, and we're never open about it because we're afraid what people might think. We're afraid that they think we might be soft or weak, and therefore we just kind of like deal with it ourselves or internally. And that's definitely not the way to deal with it, because you're kind of just making yourself, I guess, more depressed, more angry, more intolerable, and just not like a nice person to deal with. And the lesson that we learned from Melissa, and that she has throughout her life, she's always been super open about these things, and it's helped her, it's nurtured her to deal with them, and through talking about it openly as well, it's allowed her to connect with other people too that are suffering the same, and she's been able to just help them in some small way deal with it, to understand that it's not something taboo to talk about, and that we should do more of it.
Yeah, and I think just in general, obviously not just with that subject, it's just in general being more open and being able to engage with people and feeling comfortable enough to do that is such a valuable lesson, I think, for all of us. And she's really testament to that, because it literally changed her life when she was able to start speaking with people more comfortably. And so I think it's definitely time to take a deep dive into Melissa's life, and it's a really interesting one at that, and see what makes Melissa Monte ridiculously human.
Cool stuff. We good to go. Hey, Melissa Monte, how's it going? How's your day so far there in California?
My day's amazing. I've already did a long walk to breakfast in the farmer's market, so I'm having a very Santa Monica type day.
That's so cool. Santa Monica is such a great part of the world, isn't it?
It's my favorite.
Yeah. Where else have you actually lived in America?
I have lived in Northern California, East Bay, also San Diego, Big Bear, which is a little mountain town about 2 hours east of me. So you can actually snowboard and surf in the same day here in California. I lived in New York, New York, Texas, and Hawaii.
Wow, that's a lot of different places, eh? Like, and quite different too. You know, I mean, New York is like a huge city, and Hawaii is like a big sort of beach sort of town. I would assume. I've never been there, but from the pictures, that's what you assume it's like.
Yeah, neither of those places did I plan to move. Hawaii was on my bucket list to take a trip by myself because I had not done that yet. And I was like, well, Hawaii would be a really great intro trip like that because they still speak English. It's actually still the United States. And so I'll do that first and then I'll go to another country or something. And I got there and I just didn't want to leave. So I ended up checking my bag into a hotel that I wasn't staying at and saying I was like waiting for friends and family to arrive and just kind of went out on the island. And I even slept on the beach that night. And then I ended up meeting a girl at a bar the next day who let me have her couch until I found a place. And I stayed there for about half a year. And then New York, my husband and I had road tripped Europe for a month for our honeymoon. And we came back. We're like, well, we already sold all our stuff. We don't have anywhere to live. So let's just road trip the US like we've been wanting to do. So we did. And we went for 5 months and stayed with people, like even my mom's cousin that I had never met. And we couch surfed and slept in our car and Airbnb'd. And then we got to New York and we were like, well, this is amazing. I feel like it'll really push us to, I don't know, be more because there's so many inspiring people around. And so we found a little tiny room in a 3-bedroom place and stayed there for like 5 or 6 months. So yeah, both were kind of an accident, but
wow,
I love how it's so, it sounds so scary to say, okay, we don't have stuff. Where's all our stuff? We're going to like just go on the road trip through America. And the cool thing is you just make a plan. It just, you can make it happen. And it just shows you again, sometimes when you're bogged down with lots of stuff, it can be quite challenging to ever dream of doing something like that. But in that scenario, you're just like, cool, let's just go do it, which is so cool.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And it was a really big jump because at that time we were living in Big Bear and we had this 3-bedroom house for only like $1,100 a month. It was an amazing deal. And there was an attic too. And my husband had lived there for years before me. So we were trying to move out and there was just so much stuff. So I read The Art of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo. And it really talks about like finding joy and everything. And I was just like, he's almost, I call him a hoarder, but he's not that bad. But he's like, he grew up on 20 acres. And so they can keep anything and their family really just does. And so it was really kind of hard to break him of that. But yeah, we did. And we've really not looked back since. But there was some struggles. I don't know if I would recommend for people. People have asked, oh my gosh, you road tripped 9 countries for your honeymoon. We actually had to move out of that 3-bedroom house, got married 2 days later, and then 3 days after that went to Europe. And so we're staying in a different place every night. We went to 9 countries in 30 days. So it was like not relaxing. So I'm like, if it's your honeymoon, maybe go to just like a resort in Cancun and sit it out, like recover. But I'm glad we did. It definitely felt like felt like we were married 5 years by the time we were home. So,
So,
accelerated
you've got to know
marriage.
each other very, very. It's almost like the Amazing Race kind of story. You know, like you have to, keep going, keep
sure.
moving, and you have to
Really is
get on.
And where in the States did you road trip? I mean, that's 5 months. That's a long road trip.
Oh yeah. Well, first, every 4th of July, we go to his family's house because his family is what the reason I moved to Texas was because I watched, this doesn't make any sense, but I watched Sweet Home Alabama and I was like, oh, look at those guys with the values over in the South. I'm going to move to Texas. So it's like, it's not even the same place. But I always like dreamed of this like sweet home living type thing. And then I met Shane's family, and not only does he have 8 brothers and sisters, but his mom had 8 brothers and sisters, or 8 sisters. They all start with P's, except it's like Penny, Phyllis, Pixie, Pam, like all of them are A's, and then Bill. And they had like, they've all had like 5 or 6 kids also. And then their kids have even started to have kids. And so you go, and the whole day is planned out on the 4th of July, from a fishing contest at 6 a.m. to, we do a Ninja Warrior contest now because Shane was on American Ninja Warrior 2 years ago. And so all the little cousins think it's amazing. And food, and everyone holds hands and counts off, and they call it a love circle. And so they count off in the morning to see how many people are there, and then how many people are there at night. And there's normally like 70 or 80 family members in the morning, and like 150 last 4th of July dinner. And then they do fireworks, and it's a blast. So we went straight to Michigan after our honeymoon, because that's the reason that the road trip started. We're like, are we going to fly or drive? So we drove. And we're like, okay, let's just road trip the rest of the U.S. and come back. We've never driven to Michigan together before. So then we went to North Carolina. We went up to Canada. We stayed in Nebraska on accident. Not my favorite state, but I was like, we gotta get out of here. It was all like fried food and the mall, but yeah. So I think we went to twice on that road trip.
So how many turkeys does that equate to? 150 people at a family can get together like that?
I don't know. I did not partake in the turkey because I went vegan last year, so I no longer eat the species.
Nice.
And where do you like put 150 people at a lunch?
Well, that's the cool part about his family, is that they all live on, well, their immediate family alone has like 20 acres of the land, but it's on about 100 acres of land. So they each have a certain amount of acres, and then there's different houses. So when we're going to the different events, it's at a different family member's house, and we walk there. And his uncle is very wealthy, and so he's got like almost like a little mansion on the land. It's the nicest one, and this giant man-made pond that everyone sits around while we're watching the fireworks, and it's a private fireworks show that's better than our cities, I think. So it's pretty awesome. And then they have a bar on the property called Blue Moon that's in the basement of the wealthy uncle's house. And so then everyone ends up there. All the adults end up there. The kids go to bed, and normally like one of the aunts babysits all the little kids, and then we all just kind of take home the day. So yeah, there's a lot of people, but there's a lot of space. And so some of them even camp out on the land too, so they don't have to drive, because the nearest town is about a 20-minute drive.
Oh, that does sound like one of the best sort of parties that you can imagine for that kind of thing. All the family together. Just it sounds really, 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 really cool, actually.
Yeah, I think if you carried on, you'd probably have like people wanting to gate crash your Christmas festivities.
I know, and a lot of his friends used to come, but I think maybe since he's married now, less of them come. But I don't think I don't think anyone really minds. There's just so much room. People are like, oh, the more the merrier. My parents flew out for the first time 2 years ago, and they were like, this is so much fun. So I'm trying to talk a few more people into coming out. You guys should come.
It sounds like we might just be there.
4th of July. Bring a tent.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So yeah, we just wanted to say, first of all, like, thanks a lot for joining us on the podcast. Normally we kind of like give a bit of context, like, like Craig and I so far, like, we've known like quite a few of our guests, and this time the first is one of the first times that we've actually, we don't really know the guest like that well, and we met you on one of the Facebook groups for podcasts, which is the podcast movement, and I'm not sure, are you actually have you been to any of the podcast movements, or are you going to their event this year?
Yeah, I already booked my Airbnb, but I don't have my ticket yet. So I am planning on going. And
Nice.
I'm really excited for it. But I've never gone because this is my first year with a podcast. So there
Uh,
wasn't a reason before.
of course, cool.
Nice.
So yeah, we've booked our tickets, but we haven't booked our flights or anything yet. So hopefully we definitely get to see you there in person later on this year, which will be really awesome.
That would be so exciting. I would definitely be down for that.
Yeah, definitely. And so anyway, like, I listened to a couple of your podcasts yesterday and today, and I really, really like them. Like, you just come across like such a bubbly, fun, inspiring person that's been through a lot in life and just has like a lot of nice stories to share, cool anecdotes. You have great guests on as well. I really want to talk to you about the latest lady who's a Wim Hof instructor. Probably because like I actually did the Wim Hof 10-week course this year, which was really awesome. Like, just loved it to death. Like, yeah.
Wow, yeah. I found out about Wim Hof on the Tim Ferriss podcast a few years ago. And ever since that podcast, my husband takes a cold shower every day. And so you can hear him in the bathroom. He'll be like,
Ah.
woo, breathing, really funny. And so I've been a little bit too I don't know, I'm a girl and I'm cold a lot. And so I'm like, your showers are my nightmare. But now I've been doing better, but I'm not quite at Elizabeth Lee's level, which was that guest that day. She can just jump into 40-degree water like nothing now. I'd be like not able to move, stuck in there.
Yeah, it's super cold.
But I guess growing up in sort of the Bay Area in California, that's generally pretty warm as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it has seasons. It has more
Yeah.
seasons than Southern California. So I was just up there for Christmas and it was about 30 degrees Fahrenheit. So I don't know how to convert that for you, but yeah, it was definitely cold in the winter,
Yeah.
and it gets hotter in the summer, but it's not extreme. No snow
And
usually.
yeah. And so as a youngster, when you were growing up in that area, what was life like for you? Did you have a happy childhood? Were you your parents were around, they looked after you well? Were you playing sport? Give us a little bit of a background on the young Melissa was like.
I was officially an only child, and my parents separated when I was like a few months old. And so we moved in with my grandparents, which is awesome because my grandparents are like the best people. They're still hilarious to this day. And so I lived with them until I was about 4, and then we married my stepdad. That's what they say when you're in a blended family, you know. And so like my stepdad's great. He's a very good father figure, and I always felt kind of lucky that my parents were divorced because my dad was the fun one. But it's weird because you don't hear children saying this, but I specifically remember in elementary school saying something to like a friend's parent. I love my stepdad because I just don't think my dad would have been that great of a provider, but he's really fun. And it's like, what 7-year-old says provider?
What are you talking about?
Yeah, and so that's kind of how it was. And my dad was fun. I think a lot of his personality a lot of my personality I got from him. He was very into gadgets. He got me like an umbrella hat one time just to wear around, or a backpack that pulled out into a chair that I was like, this is so nerdy. But all my friends were like, this is the coolest thing ever.
That's awesome.
And it's funny because I am known as like, well, before the app queen. I have about 1,000 apps on my phone. I know every
Wow.
app. And so people used to make fun of me. I ended up working in apps for a while though. But I think I got that from the Gadget part of my dad. And so anyways, we moved out of my grandparents' house when I was 4, and I got stepbrothers at that time. And my stepbrothers need a little work. So we are not close. Um, and and it's really interesting because my stepdad was a police officer, never got a ticket in his life, never smoked a cigarette, like the most wholesome man, and his kids are just like wrought with trouble. But and yeah, so I played the piano my whole life and ran cross country and track in high school, and I was in all advanced placement and honors classes. I had a pretty charmed life until about the age of 17, and then several traumas hit back to back. So one thing you did mention that you said my podcast, I seem kind of bubbly and happy. That is one thing I've carried through everything. Even when I was at my worst, even if I was crying behind closed doors, I always tried to maintain a positive outlook, even if it felt completely fake. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, well, it's super infectious, just your bubbliness, that's for sure. So I think it's always such a great trait to have as a human being, you know what I mean? Just to be able to smile and laugh and make other people laugh and happy around you. It's just such a great thing, you know?
Mm.
Yeah, my grandma has said a few things in my life, which is funny because it was before the whole mindfulness movement being so trendy these days. But I remember one time she has 5 kids, and at one point she even had to like take a train ride when she was moving from the East Coast to the West Coast by herself. She's riding on a train with like 5 children under the age of 6. So she's got to be pretty strong. But she said something one time like, you know, people just like to think about their problems. Stop thinking about it. Like, just move on. I was like, good call. So that kind of affected me, and I've thought about it a lot throughout my life.
Yeah, it's amazing how sometimes you can walk into a room and you just sort of gravitate to certain people. And generally speaking, it's those people that are not complaining about everything. It's just they've just got a certain charm and bubbliness, and it's just so good for human interaction to have that trait. You know, it's obviously for some people it's not easy. It's like it just doesn't come naturally at all to them. But I also think it's something we can all kind of work on a little bit and maybe be a little bit better at it if we, just be a bit more engaging. And I think you've certainly got that. You were also a bit of the life of the party, apparently, as well when you were sort of young.
Yeah. Yeah, in high school, not as much. I hopped around with different groups and definitely partied a few times, but it wasn't like an every weekend thing. And once college hit, I think I was going through some stuff. Also, I was stoked about freedom. So,
Yeah.
college is crazy when you really think about it. Suddenly you're like, we have no more rules, guys. Like, let's do this. And so I really took that to another level. In my dorm, they had the cabinets were actually whiteboards, which is a very practical thing for college. And I had 8 roommates technically, but we shared a common area and we each had our own shoebox sized individual room. And so I got a good amount of scholarships going into college. So I upgraded to my own room instead of sharing one. And on the whiteboard, people had a tally on every day that Melissa went out. And if I missed a day, then it would start over. And I think I got to like 72 or something,
What?
something like that. And I was binge
Wow.
drinking. It was not healthy. My mom told me, she's like, because parents try to tell you, they're like, drinking like that is not healthy, which 100% accurate. But I'm just like, everybody here is doing it. You must be wrong. Sorry you didn't go to college, Mom. So, yeah, I was definitely, and in the Greek system, San Diego State has a very large Greek system. And so I was in a sorority called Pi Phi, and they nickname everybody because they make shirts for every event. And the back of my shirts always said party girl. So, so, that. That's saying something.
And can you just like clear something up for me? Because I always get like so confused when, you talk in America about like sorority and frat parties and all these type of things. Like, what do those terms actually mean?
So it's interesting because first of all, there's just mansions like lining the lining the main road, and those are sorority houses. So it's got to be a house that can sleep like 40 people. So when you're in a sorority, you have to go through pledge week and actually walk to all these things, and they do these ridiculous performances for you that if you're looking at it from just an objective standpoint, it's ridiculous. And so all these girls are dressed the same in their pink shirts with like their designer jeans, and they're singing these cheesy songs, and everyone's standing there like, I want to be with you for whatever reason. There's no logic there. And so you have to get accepted, and then you go to another, like go to the next round. It feels like you're competing, and they're really just being super shallow about it usually, and finding whatever the girls they think are the cutest and letting them in. And then suddenly you have like an in. You go to the parties, because I waited till sophomore year, and so sometimes you'd go to frat parties and it's like, yeah, you can't come in, or you're waiting for a while, or you at least have to stand in the line to get in. But once I was in Pi Phi, I could just walk to the door and be like, oh yeah, Pi Phi, let her in, she's Pi Phi. So, I was only in it for a little less than a year though. It's, I half dropped, but was half kicked out for drinking too much. So that says another thing. I was partying too much. They made an example out of me though. Some girl peed in the front yard, and we got in a lot of trouble, and then I was the next incident. So they made an example out of me, and they had to do a trial, I had to present my case in front of everybody and have it voted on, and
Wow.
it was very interesting. But at that point, I was kind of over it. But in my defense, the really, really heavy partying started when I found out my dad was dying, and I just kind of spiraled from there. So
Yeah, wow. So we'll get into that like in 1 second. But I actually remember I was traveling in America like in 1999, and I worked in a summer camp, and then I ended up meeting up with some of the guys afterwards that were American guys, and I went to like one of their colleges, which was UVA, University of Virginia, and we went to go watch UVA play Virginia Tech in the American football, like in college. And it was just like, it was like crazy. They had like 60,000 people at this game. I was like, I can't believe this is a college game. It's massive. But then afterwards, they had like the parties, and it was literally like the parties that you see on the movies, which for us was just like, this is insane. And like when they have their kegs of beer and like people like going between houses and things, and I was like, oh my God, this is like my dream. I'm 19 or 8. I was 18 and I'm like, this is just amazing.
yeah, it's another level, especially San Diego State. I had never, even to this day, I have never been to a party like I have in San Diego State. They used to each fraternity would have a different, like one big party every semester. And they would fully build like a pool with haystacks and a liner and a waterfall. They would get so into it. Snoop Dogg came to one of our parties.
No way.
He like smoked weed with people and performed. It was very interesting. Wow. So, yeah, it's another level. San Diego State wasn't very into sports though. So I still am pretty baffled by Texas. When I moved to Texas, people are just all about the college games. And I'm like, so you really want to watch people that are not as good as the other people? Like, that's what you're doing today? Like, why not just watch the same thing one level up? It's like nobody watches the Junior Olympics, right? So it doesn't make sense to me.
But it's amazing how big that... sorry.
I was just going to say, but I'm probably one of the only people who just, I don't understand sports. Like I do, it's kind of cool. I like watching people at the peak of their abilities, but people who get emotionally invested make no sense to me. Like, you don't have this ability. This person's performing for you and you're just mad because he didn't do well enough, or people stick with a team that they've never even seen win and they're loyal to it. Just switch teams, like, just because they're in your town. So like, I'd rather go play the sport than than sit there and just watch people do it. Especially like, oh yeah, we're a Spartans fan or whatever it is. It's like we're a 49ers family, and it's like,
Yeah.
why? Get a hobby.
That's classic. Oh. One of my friends always says, it's like we don't get to, when we're having that frustration or that feeling, we don't get to like we did in the old days, maybe be able to take out our club and go and hit someone on the head and have a fight. So nowadays we can like have sports where we can be like, yeah, we're getting it all out, you know. So that's his excuse for being such a ridiculous sport fan.
But isn't it? You're getting it all out through other people. You're not. You're sitting on the couch eating a bag of chips. And so it's like, it's almost like the epidemic with like, I was just reading an article about how virtual reality is going to change the world, because right now we are going to get, things are getting so much more realistic. It's not just going to be these crazy VR glasses and it feeling kind of strange. Like, technology speeds up fast. So it could be 10 years until we actually feel like we're living in this little virtual house that we built. And somebody was saying in this article, well, why would you spend any time in real reality if your real reality is you're living in a little studio apartment and you're out of shape? And so people might start neglecting themselves and their bodies even more, just leaving their virtual reality just to go to the bathroom or something because they're living in a mansion in their virtual world. So it's a very interesting perspective, something to think about as we adopt all these technologies.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting thought. And how does that play into your physical being as your physical health and all that? I think it might, by the sounds of that, it could just become even harder. I don't know. I mean, maybe you end up doing more physical exercise because you're on the track or something like that, but in the VR world. But it sounds like it would just become easier to become even more sedentary in some way, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think that's why it's so important to bring in a side of mindfulness to everything that you do. Because even if you're with one group of friends that say have certain beliefs, those beliefs tend to get more and more extreme. That's why people that live in rural towns have such strong beliefs that I might not understand at all, whereas people that are well-traveled tend to be more open-minded. I think the same goes for anything. When you're like, okay, all this technology is coming, the world's changing, you want to dive into it. I am an early adopter. I dive into those things. I think it's cool. I try to be the first to use it. I'm not very cynical with it. But you also have to stop and say, okay, well, there has been a link to these things and cancer, so turn off the Wi-Fi at night. Or, okay, like, you're neglecting the actual only vehicle you have in this universe, so stop for a moment and realize. Or TV, people nowadays, it's funny because with the on-demand streaming services, people are binging stuff more than they were before. Even since you've been able to record TV, it's like, okay, well, I watched every episode of The Kardashians or something like that on Saturday. 10 years ago, people would have been like, oh my God, are you okay? Is something wrong with you? You watched TV for 15 hours? Like, get outside. We're having an intervention. And now everyone's like, oh yeah, me too. So, it's like Netflix and chill is on like 10% of the t-shirts I see now. It's insane. So you've got to take a step back from any patterns that you're acquiring and say, is this a healthy pattern? Should I do something differently? Is this the best for my future self? So that's an important thing.
I love that. A series intervention. I love it.
One more episode.
Yeah, one more, please.
It's classic. You can imagine, like, if that was the old days, people would be walking out the video store with like this sort of stack of videos, you know what I mean? And people be like, what's going on with you, bud?
I know. Yes. VHS tapes.
Yeah,
you can't even binge those. You're like, your VCR gets too hot and explodes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny, like lots of people wouldn't even know what a VHS tape is, like the youngsters, they'd have no clue. Like, they'll be, what are you talking about?
I know, but you know, you also say go play outside, and they're like, "What? Like, is that a new app?" It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I was the last generation to actually play outside, so it's sad.
Yeah, exactly. So you also mentioned
It
like
really ages. It really ages you a little. Sorry, it ages you a little bit when you actually start speaking like that to young people out there. Is like, when I was younger, I used to climb trees, and you could just see them rolling their eyes and going like, "Oh yeah, you're really old, aren't you?" And it's so hard to try and bridge that gap between, wanting to get outside and be in nature, be active, and then it's just so good for our brains and our just forget the physical health. It's just so good for our emotional well-being, and we just, and then it's so hard to make it sort of exciting to get outside when our brains are wired to like big flashing lights. We just want to sit there and play games and stuff. It's really actually a tough, and I think the work that you're doing with sort of the mind stuff. I think the mind is the most important complex machine in the world, and I think the more we can learn about that, and we'll come into that later on, I think it's only like super positive, because when we know how we tick, we start to make changes in our lives to support that, and it comes from the brain. So yeah, I think I'd love to get into that in a little bit.
Well, I was gonna say, Wim Hof says feeling is understanding, which is a very big thing in my life for the last year or so, 2 years probably, because as I'll get into in a while, I was suffering some intestinal problems, and so that's a big catalyst to me going vegan. But in the last year, I've read a ton of books on health and just how everything comes back to the body. And so we're all so accustomed to ignoring our bodies. And this plays into the playing outside, because we're all just energy and cells and things like that. So when your body's trying to tell you something or your mind's trying to tell you something, everything's kind of connected in weird ways. And so the more we lose touch with our connection with nature and our connection with our bodies, then the more we lose touch with our intuition. And back in the day, people used to travel the globe like on a ship with using mostly their intuition, and no compasses weren't even invented back then. So we're losing that now. And even though we have technology to make up for it, we don't we don't have that natural instinct anymore, and we feel lost without these devices. So I've been making a point to go outside without my device as often as possible these days.
Yeah, that's really, really great. And yeah, it's amazing, like how like technology, it's like so good for some reasons, and then for so many other reasons it's not good. You know what I mean? And for some reason, it's the no good reasons are what is getting used. It's getting used the most for, and it's impacting us the most as a society, it seems. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, we really need to be conscious of like how we use technology and use tools or use software to kind of make us kind of just ignore it for a little bit, and put it to the side. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that our nature is to be kind of passive and complacent, and that's why you see so much of that. And so that you have to take the extra step, and it might feel hard, but the more that you do that, take the extra step to be conscious or to stop and take a step back and look at what you're doing at any given moment, what impact you're having on yourself, on the universe around you, on other people. And just if you're constantly doing that, you can't really go wrong. You're always going to make mistakes and get up and Facebook in a day and things like that. But when you're like, wow, I don't have any real life friends anymore, they're all on Facebook, then maybe you should step back and go outside, go do a meetup or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really true.
And so life for you has thrown you like a few curveballs, and has it not always been hasn't always been fantastic. You know what I mean? Like we all have our ups and our downs, and I know for you, from listening to your podcast and understanding a bit about your life story, that I think when you were probably around 16, things kind of took a little bit of a turn, probably for the worse, and you had like a run of one or two or more bad things that that happened to you. Not that we want to harp on about it, but I just it's kind of, in a way, it's interesting to know what you've gone through, because there's a lot of lessons there for people to hear, and they can probably also relate to. So do you mind if we just sort of go into that a little bit, and you tell us what you went through from, say, about 16, 17?
Yeah, I am very transparent with my life stories now, because I do feel like hearing other people's stories is part of the thing that helped me get through mine. So I also realize that it helps me to heal when I'm helping other people through. So the first thing was, it's funny because for years I thought the first thing bad that happened to me was when I was 17, which was when I was raped. But this whole Me Too thing that's been popping up these days unleashed some repressed memories, something that I knew happened but didn't see it I didn't see it in its clarity, because it happens, you think it's your fault, and then you just kind of internalize it as so. And so then hearing all these stories, I was looking back and I was like, that was not even close to my fault. That was the thing that actually affected me the most. And so when I was 15, actually, I was raped the first time, but it wasn't full intercourse. It was the first time I drank, really, too. And there was a crowd of people around. And so I woke up and it was happening. And this was the first time I had even done anything with a guy. So I don't think I had one first kiss before that point. And my head was against the bed spring, and I threw up on him, actually. And so he steps back, and right then there's two people by the door, and they're like, we have to get out of here. And so I was supposed to be staying at my close friend's house because my mom was out of town, and she was dating this older guy that was very popular, and we said we're going to the movies, but we really went back to my house where there was no parents. Drank, this happens. They actually leave me in my own throw up. Like, I woke up for the second time in a pile of my own vomit, and I tried to clean it up. I was still pretty out of it, and I put laundry detergent on it and tried to vacuum it up. It was not my finest moment. And I spent the whole next day crying. I didn't go to school for a day, and then I came back and I did tell a couple close friends, more to kind of get it out there, and I process it a little bit. I hadn't told anybody. I hadn't spoken to anyone. My friend that was there didn't know what had happened because she couldn't remember the night. And instead of anybody really saying like, wow, that was, you obviously wouldn't initiate it, that you had never done anything. There was a crowd of people around watching. So it was pretty traumatic, but instead it got around the school. And I was raised in the church, actually, and I don't identify as Christian at all anymore, but that was one of the catalysts also, was they took away all my solos in this big performance we were supposed to do, and they didn't treat me the same anymore, and it was really heartbreaking. And so but it wasn't until this last year with the Brock Turner case that came up, and then the Me Too hashtag trending, that I just started hyperventilating when I was listening to that girl's letter to Brock Turner or to the judge, and I just started crying, and I told my husband, and was like, I didn't even tell you about this, but this was the first thing that happened to me. And I was like, and honestly, I think that affected my personality after that, because after that I really didn't take sex seriously as I should have. I tried to kind of drown it out, and I had a boyfriend at the time, but I ended up like convincing him to have a threesome with me and my friend, and just doing these weird things. And it was with one guy, so it wasn't that bad, but at the same time I was just trying to create a stronger memory than the other things that had happened to me, I think. And then I stopped. I went through like 2 years of that, and then like now I'm like fairly straight-laced when it comes to certain things, unless I'm in the right relationship. But yeah, and so I was dealing with that, and during that time, my boyfriend And his best friend was my best friend's boyfriend. So the four of us were always together. And then she had broken up with her boyfriend, and he would call and say he was going to kill himself and things like that. And after 6 months of hearing that, you start to react, that's selfish. Cut it out. Why are you doing this to this girl? This is like psychological mind trick. And did. He hung himself. And so I had a lot of guilt that went with that. It was my first time losing anybody. I cried a lot. And then I went away to college. And my first year I was in college, I found out my dad was dying, or he had cancer. And my dad was always the strongest person I had ever known. He was just very energetic, muscular, loved to just camp and like sleep in his car, and very adventurous. And when I found out a few months later, I went back home to visit him, and he had lost about 50 pounds. His stomach looked pregnant. He had a tumor, and he just looked completely different. And he kind of lost a fire in him. And at that time, so my dad married a 28-year-old when he was 48. She's awful. She was like this kind of evil person. She was being abusive at that time, and we couldn't stay at my dad's house because she wouldn't leave, and they were supposed to be separated. And we got a hotel, this ghetto little hotel in the middle of nowhere, and I had come back to visit my dad, and he took me to the hot tub, and I was kind of annoyed because I was still like teenage angst kind of thing going through it. And it's like, why am I at this ghetto hotel? You couldn't have got a nicer one. My dad's standing there with his stomach out, and he like closes his eyes and looks up and takes a few deep breaths, and I'm kind of losing patience, like, what's going on? And then he ends up looking at me and just saying some stuff that I didn't really know where it was going, and saying he gives my stepdad his blessing to walk me down the aisle when I get married. And I just lose it. I'm just crying. I had never really considered the possibility of losing him at that time. And so the next time I visited, things got worse, and things kept getting worse. And the last time he was at a little kind of home where people go when they're dying, and I was having to hold up his juice for him, and it was like dribbling, and he wasn't making a lot of sense. He said something about the room being very oily, and I was like kind of laughing, and I fell asleep holding his hand. And then my stepdad came to pick me up because I had to fly back to college, and my dad couldn't even say goodbye, and you could just see the pleading in his eyes. There's something about knowing somebody doesn't want to die. I feel like most people's stories are like, well, she had accepted it, or something like that. And it's easy. It's easier for the people around you. But my dad didn't want to die. He wasn't ready to go. And he looked at me like he knew it was the last time he'd be looking at me. And I walked out trying to be strong, and I just fell to my knees in the parking lot and just started sobbing like a toddler and flew home. And it was just so hard. And so it was 4 days later, my aunt calls and she says, hey, Missy, you might want to come home this weekend. Your dad's not doing too well. And the idea of going through that again was too hard. And so I made some excuses about why I couldn't go. And it was weird because I had a dream that my mom called me and told me that my dad died. And then I woke up to my phone, and it was my mom. And it was almost like deja vu, but also wondering if it was still a dream. And then she told me that my dad died. And I don't know, I cried a lot that day, but it took a few months to hit me, really, because I wasn't used to seeing him every day. And so it took a few times calling his cell phone and him not answering, and being kind of shaken, like, oh, wow, this cell phone number's still on. And then starting to just call it to hear his voice on the voicemail and things like that. And so, and it's also interesting I was his only child. And so I felt like I was the only person dealing with that. You grieve for a while, and then quickly people are to say, you should be over this by now. And you're like, you're not dealing with it. And I think hearing that made me push back even more. And there were times that I almost milked the grief, but I think that's me looking at it level-headed now, looking back, like, how could you have, I definitely remember using it as an excuse in college classes, like, but my dad died. This is why I forgot I was enrolled in poli-sci, So That was a real story. But yeah, yeah. So after that, I think it was just a lot of me spiraling and acting out and making bad decisions, I guess.
Wow, Melissa, let me just say, like, that's a really, really heart-wrenching story. I mean, both. It's very hard for us. I'm sure you feel the same way, guys, to sort of even begin to comprehend how that must feel. But obviously, in the interest of having a chat to you, we'll try and understand a little bit of that scenario. But it's that's a young age to be having these kind of things happen. I mean, it's never a good time, obviously, but at that age. And at the time, were you sort of aware that this stuff had really sort of snowballed and affected you? Or had it been like you'd almost try to compartmentalize these events that have happened to you, like, when you were 15, first of all, and then again? Had you tried to just kind of get on with it and you weren't aware of it? Or was it something that was kind of on your mind a lot of the time?
I really prided myself on it not affecting me. And so I I and I think that you're not aware that things affect you and then it manifests itself in other ways. And so it had to have affected me because that was the year that I developed a very heavy eating disorder that lasted for 8 years. And at the time when it was starting, I did not connect the two. It was more like I remember hearing somebody in a sorority saying something, making a joke about throwing up their food. And I remember that triggering me and being like, people can just do that because I had always liked to eat. I was always a very small person, but I could sit there with like a box of goldfish crackers and like eat half of it and then be really feel really awful about myself. And so I remember this. I think it was after a night of drinking too much and thinking, I drank too much and then ate Trujillo's, the famous Mexican food place on the corner. And I remember trying and being like, how do people throw up their food? This is so hard. Like, how do you even? And and then I don't even know. It might have only been a couple of months until it completely took over my life to where I remember sitting in my room one time thinking, I don't think I could ever actually be with somebody because how am I going to hide that I'm doing this? And I have no idea how I'm going to stop. So it was a long, long battle and a lot of shame with that just because it's a weird thing to do in general. But looking back, you start to learn like those types of things are because you feel like you're losing control of everything else. So you're like taking control. And when I would hear that at the time I was going through it, I would kind of roll my eyes and think that's so cliche. Like that's not what's going on here. But looking back in a healthy state, it was what was going on there. So yeah, to answer your question, I did not know that things were affecting me. And like I said earlier, I've always been able to kind of keep that bubbly attitude and go do something fun to keep my mind off of it. And I wasn't accomplishing that many real positive things with my life at that time, but I was having a blast. People liked to be around me, and no one else would have really understood what was kind of festering inside my soul at that time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I just thanks for sharing that with us. It's quite interesting how our body actually deals with trauma, and we obviously react in different ways. And I always think it's so important in life to just be conscious of other people and where they are in their life at that point in time and why they are like they are. You might not necessarily agree with the person for whatever reason, and they might have different likes and different interests, and they might do silly things compared to you. But there's a reason that people are like, the way they are. So it's just important to understand that we're all different, and people that are going through bad times, there's often a catalyst, and, your one was obviously, your dad dying and also being raped and stuff like that, and that's really, really hard, for someone to deal with, and that's why they might go down the wrong path and do crazy things. So it's so important to actually talk to people and to probably understand where they're coming from. And I don't, one thing like I am conscious of doing more, just like you said at the start of when you started speaking, is that it's so important to be honest and open about our lives, because the more people know, the more they can relate. And you can probably just help people as well by being honest with your own story, because there's other people that are suffering in the same way as you.
Yeah, and I think that is also what invokes real change. And you can see that happening with the Me Too movement. Because, like, I held in that story for most of my life. I mean, plenty of people knew, but not what really happened. and I didn't even know. And so it took hearing other people's stories to identify that and speak up. And that's why so many people are coming forward with Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein and Aziz Ansari and all of these people. It's like this epidemic. And I've talked about this with my female friends before. I don't know. I know one person that's a close friend of mine that has not been raped. One. And I have a lot of close friends. And so she is kind of the golden child with everyone else. Like, wow, she hasn't been raped. Like, lucky her. And honestly, they're not these stories where you can look at it both ways depending on the decade that you're talking about it. Like, oh, she drank too much and asked for it. Yeah, some of them are like that, but I'd say 60 to 70% actually involved violence. And so it's really important, especially when you can share your story and you don't know how many lives you're saving. Just that extra awareness in somebody who hasn't gone through it to be able to get out of it, or before they develop a habit of bulimia or this psychological spiral in their mind that's going to take years of untraining. So to be able to share stories gives people more to go off of, to recognize what might be manifesting in their own lives.
Yeah, I think that's so important, is just that if we can be, it's so easy to say, I guess, as well, but it's obviously those, at that age, you're also filled with shame and guilt and stuff associated with it. So it's, in the interest of helping others, it's not easy, but I think at the end of the day, the result is definitely a positive one. If you're able to come to that point where you can, be able to discuss these kinds of things. But I'd also like to just go a little bit deeper into that sort of eating disorder scenario, because I think that's, the prevalence of that is actually also a lot more than one might also think. And I think in this day and age with media and that kind of thing, there's a lot of pressure on boys and girls. I would imagine the prevalence is higher amongst girls, but or women. But was that something? Did you have sort of, let's say, body issues from a young age, or was that sort of more something that came from a traumatic youth, if you know what I'm trying to say? And just so that I'd like to just try and understand that more, so that maybe someone else might understand the kind of triggers and the kind of find themselves in that situation. So what was it, as simple as, just hearing that, or had you already had this sort of body issue as a youngster?
It was a combination of the two, for sure. I remember the first time somebody called me fat vividly, and I wasn't fat. I was underweight for my body type. But something like that, even for a very skinny 13-year-old, it affects you. And you start to look at that all of a sudden, and you've never looked at it before. So then suddenly you're walking by the mirror every time and you're looking at it. And then it didn't help that I had always been very petite. And in high school, I got the Depo shot, which is the birth control shot, and it does cause you to gain weight. And I have like stick straight figure with like no hips, so I gained 5 pounds and I feel like I'm fat. It's sad, first world problem, I suppose. But when that happened, there was a period of time in high school that I was bigger than I have ever been to this day. I was like 135 pounds or something like that, and it was triggered by that Depo shot, which I was not used to dealing with. But I was very athletic. I ran cross country and track, which is a very heavily active sport. And after I didn't get it anymore, then I shrunk back down. So it was okay. But it was something that was in my mind, and it was a feeling I didn't like having at all. And so when I reached college, and suddenly I'm in charge of my own meal plan, and I had a pretty good meal plan. I got like $15 a day, which now sounds like nothing, but at the time people are like, "That you got the good meal plan?" And so you're like going to like the buffet and like stocking up on food in our pockets and things like that, and not eating healthy. We're like, "Oh wow, you're going to the grocery store. This Hot Pocket is $1 and vegetables are $1.50." So yeah, and I think it's something that we have to be so careful with now, because it might have taken more, maybe, this is just a guess, but it may have taken more a long time ago when images in the media were healthier to trigger something like that. But now, the reason that people are cracking down so much on the photoshopping of images, CVS just actually announced that they are no longer going to be photoshopping their models on their products and things like that. And if they're carrying a product that does do that, they will somehow disclose that, which is a huge step. I love things like that, because what we don't realize we're doing is our brains are very impressionable. So that's why you can look back, and like Roman times, and being bigger was the most attractive thing you could be. And now it's as thin as possible, and it's not a realistic thin. But certain bodies can get there, and so that's the expectation suddenly, And so I still struggle with that. I'll be perfectly honest. And I'm so active now. I was joking with my friend, like, we don't have to make New Year's resolutions for our health. That's something that's already very part of my life. But when there's a vacation or something like that, and I get a little bit bigger, I have to fight that feeling. I'm working on deconditioning that, not succumbing to it and saying, okay, I just have to lose this much more. I want to try to think and like force myself to stand naked in front of the mirror and get comfortable with my body. And I'll go as cheesy as starting to say things that I love about myself. Like, you are amazing here, and even picking out the parts that I don't love and reaffirming that I love them. So I try do all those little things that you hear are psychological hacks, and I have no complaints. It's been working, but it's not completely fixed. So I think it's one of those things where, yeah, my dad's death was a catalyst. Finding out he was dying was a catalyst to really falling into it, but they were thoughts since I was young, and not necessarily because of something extreme, just because of society.
So yeah, the question I have is, you have a eating disorder for 8 years or so, which also leads to another health issue, which I think was, what is it called again? Chronic gastritis. And
yeah,
which I would like you to explain what that is. But how do you then overcome that? Like, what's the turning point to making a change? And then also, do you also have like a strange relationship with food now? I know you mentioned that you've gone vegan, but do you have any sort of eating issues to this day? Because I can imagine that this is something that takes a long time in life to overcome for a lot of people, and maybe it has different stages.
Yeah, I feel very lucky. I was able to self-heal. So I didn't go through any sort of therapy for it, but I am an avid learner. I look up things, and that's really the reason that I've never really sought therapy, because I think in my head I can do this on my own. It's going to take more work than just arriving somewhere. So it was interesting though, because I had been pretty close to healing myself. I had actually not fallen back into a pattern for about 6 months when I found out I had chronic gastritis. And so the first time I was in Mammoth snowboarding, and my husband and I had gone snowboarding. This was before we were married. And I was on the mountain, and I had this crazy stomach ache. I thought I was getting sick. So I had to have him drop me off at a coffee shop, and I said I was just going to work on some stuff while he finished the day. And it was weird because I would get overwhelmingly nauseous to where your tongue's salivating, you know, that feeling that you can like hang over the toilet and everything's going to come out, which is interesting because I don't know if it was because so the whole time I was bulimic, I had never thrown up naturally. For whatever reason, even when I had gotten the flu, I never had a moment where I needed to throw up. I also never threw up from drinking, even though I would heavily drink. I could drink a bottle of vodka in a night, and the only real side effect would be that I'd not remember anything. But I was never really even a out of control drunk and things like that. But so I was sitting there about to vomit and I couldn't even handle it. And then I would sneeze, and I sneezed, and suddenly I felt fine. It was like subsiding a little bit. And then it would kind of get worse, and then I'd sneeze and it would come back. And I thought to myself, well, okay, this is a very distinct thing that I can Google and figure out what's going on with me. And ended up finding a forum talking about chronic gastritis that caused from such and such, including bulimia. So I knew that that's what was going on. And I ended up going to the doctor, getting an official diagnosis, but it was chronic. And so they said it might last my entire lifetime. And at this time, I wasn't being open with my bulimia. It was still so close to the time that I had healed that I wasn't comfortable because I didn't fully trust myself to not slip back into it. And I knew what it felt like when somebody knew, because my mom found out about the second year that it was going on, because she's a mom and they know things like that. And I hated it. I hated the feeling that she was watching me every time I'd go to the bathroom, even if I wasn't doing anything. Like it feels like there was no healing there because you're being constantly accused of it anyways. And so I wasn't comfortable sharing with Shane what was happening to me. And I was very, very worried. So when we were on our honeymoon, it happened again in France. And I was in a hostel, in an 8-bed hostel with the curtain shut, and I was keeled over and I couldn't even stop myself from moaning. And so this was happening like every month where I couldn't leave the bed for an entire day. And it was just the worst pain I had ever felt in my life. And I was so worried because all I could think about, we ended up staying on the floor at a friend's place a few nights later, and I stayed up until about 5 a.m. just Googling things and being terrified that, oh my gosh, is this how I'm going to get intestinal cancer? Because what it is it's acid in your stomach. It's your body can't digest it anymore. Your stomach lining gets thin, and the purpose of it is to protect your intestines, and instead everything's seeping out into the rest of your body. And so I knew I had to make some changes. So I changed things about my eating habits. I stopped eating acidic foods and things like that, and it would feel a little bit better, but it wasn't gone completely. And in all my health research, I learned a lot about vegan diets, and the more I read, the more I couldn't deny it, and I started getting grossed out about meat anyways. It's where most of our diseases come from. Our body actually digests it in a crazy way. There's a lot about it, but I couldn't go back from that. Decided to try out a vegan diet, and within about a month and a half, I felt like a completely different person, and I've never, ever felt that feeling again. So it's insane, and that was one of the things I learned is if you ever need to heal from somebody, if you get cancer, anything like that, the first thing with a doctor that knows anything about anything, most doctors will just give you prescriptions. I wouldn't ask your doctor about nutrition because they only need to take 1 hour of nutrition training like the whole time in their careers. It's insane. They know nothing about it. They are all about the drugs, the pharmaceuticals, that type of healing, most of them. But there is a change lately. And so they give them a vegan diet to begin your healing process. And your body has an amazing ability to heal itself if you give it the right tools. But what most of our bodies are doing is just fighting off what we're putting into it the whole time. It takes 10 days for our bodies to fight off 1 serving of chicken, the negative effects of things that it does. And so your body can't fight off other stuff if it's working on fighting off your food the whole time. So when you take out those elements and you're just giving your body nutrition, the nourishment that it needs, you not only can get more vitamins because, come on, if you're eating 3 servings of meat for 3 meals a day, then you're getting this little side of veggies. Most people get about 10% of the actual nutrients they need if they're eating their vegetables, which a lot of people don't do. And so if your whole meal comes from this, then you can get it in such a way that you're giving your body like super force of nourishment, and it has everything it needs, and it can fight off things faster than you'd ever really imagine. So that's how my full healing ended up, and I'll never go back now because I've lived it and I feel what it feels like. But through the whole time I was bulimic, it's not like I really realized that I just wanted to throw my body to the wind and like not care. It's kind of riddled with this obsession with health. I worked out every day, sometimes in an unhealthy way where I'd cry if I couldn't go to the gym or something like that. But I always had a strong desire to be healthy, and I would try to buy healthy foods, but then I would have a binge moment and get whatever was the cheapest or eat too much of something and it would trigger it. And then the moment I had that one bite that was too much, then I knew it wasn't going to be something that I was going to keep down. And so on really bad days, normally when something emotional was happening, there would be days that I would be in my room binging and purging all day long. The whole day. That's all I would do, to where it hurt to talk at the end of the day because there's just so much pain going on in your throat. And, you know, for like a year afterwards, when I first started sharing my story and I was really getting into the details like that, I couldn't say it without tearing up because it wasn't something that it was the only thing I really kept a secret. Everything else I was so open about. If I knew that it had happened to me, if I was aware of it, then I've always been an oversharer, but that was like my dirty little secret. And so now though, the more that I've shared, the more I come in contact with people who have gone through the same thing or are going through something. And for whatever reason, the very first time I ever shared my story, it was at a friend's place, and I was just having this really good conversation with somebody I was not that close to. And you could just see her face kind of go white. And she grabbed me and she said, thank you so much for sharing this. Though I don't know what's been going on with me, but the last 2 months I've been she said, I've been doing a lot of Molly and lately I've been purging. I've been purging my food, and I wasn't really looking at it like I was trying to be bulimic, but it's happened like 3 or 4 times, and now it's starting to happen more often. And she like started crying, and at that moment I realized that was like a sign for me that I knew I needed to share my story more often. And it really is, it's like AA, where they tell you to go and you're sharing your story constantly. The more I share my story, the more I affirm to myself that I'm healed and that it's not something that plagues me anymore. And so I'm lucky that I rarely feel those feelings, but every now and then around the holidays, if I'm in a pattern that I'm used to being, and like right now I eat vegetables and whatever, but I've accidentally ate a cookie that I found out had dairy in it, and I got very weird and I felt those feelings, and I had to sit there and recognize it and call myself out and say, wow, you're having unhealthy thoughts right now. It was a mistake. You didn't mean to do it. Nothing's going to happen. And I'm forced myself to meditate. And I got through that moment. And then I just had to show gratitude for my progress on being able to do that, because that would have never happened before.
Well, that's there's so many things there that are complex. You know, we're complex beings, and you know, diet is it's Gareth and I obviously discussed this a lot, and it's just such a complex subject, but it's also super interesting, and it's the one thing that we all do, you know. And I don't think there's enough emphasis put on the way we eat and the things we eat, and I think, like you said as well, Melissa, we're an ecosystem, you know. Our one thing affects the other thing, and vice versa. There's no separation really. Where the one system begins and the other one ends is impossible to know. So it is so interesting. And you know, you just have a look at talking about healing. You know, in hospitals, generally speaking, look at what food is given to sick people in the hospital, and it's not, in my mind, conducive to any kind of sort of healing. You know, it's like sugary stuff most of the time. You know, they have some custard and have some, you know, jelly or jello, as you say over there, and that's not, you know, the way it should be. So, but you know, in terms of your journey with veganism, did you have like because obviously this is a big topic as well. Did you sort of have a moment where you're like, that's it, I'm becoming a vegan? Or had you had this sort of stepwise process to sort of shifting your diet from I would imagine, sort of a meat eater to a vegan? What was the process there?
I started out going mostly vegan. And so I live in Santa Monica. It's one of the easiest places in the world to be vegan. I could get, I think, like 20 different vegan places delivered on Uber Eats at this very moment. So I decided to go mostly vegan, and I switched to just organic chicken, and I was still eating sushi at that time. And so when I would order, if there was a vegan option, I would just get vegan instead. And then I realized that after about a month, I had not had meat. I think I had eggs in the morning a few times, but no meat. So suddenly I remember thinking about ordering my favorite organic chicken and quinoa thing from this health food place nearby. And I got it, ripped the chicken, and something about the view of the just kind of flesh flaking off, I internalized it in a different way than I had ever done before. And all I could think of was that I'm literally eating flesh. And so I haven't eaten chicken since that moment. And the other interesting part is that I used to love like red meat, bloody steak. I remember one time in particular going on a girls' trip in high school with friends, and one of the girls didn't eat meat. And now I think about this and it's so messed up, but one of the girls didn't eat meat, and we had made steak, and I was like, oh, extra bloody or something like that. And we're in bathing suits. We had been at the river all day. And this girl was like wondering why, like, giving us grossed out looks about eating the meat. And so I was like, oh, Jessica. And I like rubbed the meat down my body, and blood was dripping like through my bikini top. So gross. and also when we lived in New York, we almost moved in with these super awesome girls that were vegan. And one of the first intros was, and if you guys cook meat, we don't mind that you cook meat here. And my eyes kind of went up. You don't mind if I eat a meal? What are you talking about? She's like, but don't cook meat on our pots and pans. And we looked at each other like, this bitch is crazy. And now we're talking about it, and we're like, I don't want anyone cooking meat on my pans. That's disgusting. So it's funny, your mind just kind of does swap. And the longer I'm vegan, the more I really care about the impact on the environment. I'm also such a firm believer in energy, and through my reading with health, we're all just basically these cells of energy. And so you are what you eat. And that's why it's so important when even people that still eat chicken, they want to find free range chicken and things like that. The reason is because the standard chicken that you get is sitting in this little coop for however long, not able to move, and they're getting fed the crappiest corn on the planet. And so then when you eat that, most of the nutrition that goes into you get the protein from the chicken, but you get whatever they ate. And so the higher the quality chicken, then at least you're getting some good stuff from it. But also, it was hard for me to separate the fact that I'm thinking these chickens or cows, they're living in a life of pain. So when you look at the muscles of the body and you're terrified or you're going through trauma and you're in pain or in distress, your cells react in a different way. And so to know that everything that you're eating just has baked in their being this fear, this like, it's basically spirals of negative energy, and you're just putting that in, and it's supposed to be the nourishment for your soul. It stopped making sense to me. And so once something's in my mind, once I know the logic about something, then I can't really go back. And yeah, it's interesting though to note as the time goes on, wow, did not used to feel this before. And now, but it ends up being a catalyst to other things. I'm really trying to reduce my waste now. A lot of good has come from being vegan. And I find that like I'm in a group on Facebook called Zero Waste Vegans. And so somebody was just talking about, oh, it's interesting. You do one thing and then it kind of spirals into another thing. And so to neglect one area of your life is probably rubbing off on other areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And are you like now one of those radical, hardcore type vegans who looks down on people that are omnivores, or are you kind of more understanding because you get it that not everyone is in the same space as you might be right now? And yeah.
I do understand. I think that's something that a lot of vegans joke about because when you first go vegan, you're finding out a lot of stuff. So your mind is blown. My mind was blown with a lot of the reading. I read this book called How Not to Die, and it and The Truth About Cancer. And so those also, it was important to me because of my dad. And like I said before, I thought he was the strongest person I knew. And he was so active and things like that, but he still died of lymphoma. And so when I started looking into it, one of the biggest links to blood cancers like lymphoma is chicken. And you think of chicken as the healthy one, but that's all advertising. Chicken does just as much to your body as like, people know by this point red meat, limit your red meat. People don't talk about it with the chicken. It's just different areas that it affects. It's not one worse than the other. So if you believe in limiting red meat, you should also look into why you should limit chicken, because right now most of the stuff that everybody knows is just kind of given to them by big companies. One of the best things that I like to give people is what the health, because it's actually a movie and it's easy to watch, the documentary, but it's a big eye opener when you realize that, oh, well, the National Cancer Foundation or whatever it's called, half of their sponsors are the dairy industry, and that's one of the biggest links. It's insane. And so you should always take the extra step to kind of look into it, especially for yourself. Because my grandma likes to say, she's like, well, my mom ended up, or she ate meat and butter and everything, and she lived to be 97. And I look at her and I say, well, Nanny, that's what we call her. Some people smoke their whole lives and never develop COPD, but my grandma is living with COPD right now. So what you have to realize is that we each have different vulnerabilities with our body. And that's the thing that's going to be targeted. And so you can have a brother or a sister that might never come down with something and be eating the same thing as you, but that she might not have the same vulnerability. You could end up with totally different diseases. You could never get something. And so it's all about improving your odds. So I'm not aggressive. I was with my mom for a while because I care about her and I see certain things that she's struggling with and I feel like I have the answer. But you have to be understanding, because I am in this little kind of like the epitome of the health movement here in Santa Monica. It's very easy for me to be aware of all this stuff. But I went to South Dakota recently and could not find one thing to eat on any menu. It was insane. And so how are people going to know? You can just educate and understand, because I remember what it was like to be there.
So can I just ask you on that, you were talking about family and brothers and what have you. Are you an advocate of doing genetic testing to see where you're at?
I would. It's a scary thing. Sometimes you hear of the things like, oh, I know people whose parents have died of something and they can get that test to see if they have the gene. I don't know what I would pick there because I've never been faced with it, but I think I would want to know so that I could do whatever I could to decrease those odds. I did do the 23andMe DNA testing, and I was pleasantly surprised with my results. My part of the whole thing that made it worth the whole $200 for me. Actually, it was only $100 because I got it on Prime Day. But what made it worth all the money for me was the little section on it says muscle composition or body composition, and it says you are in the 4% of people with a body composition of that of an endurance athlete or something. So, I'm not prone to anything specific, which felt good to know. But yeah, I think you should educate yourself so that you can take all the precautions that are needed. Otherwise, how are you supposed to know? Maybe the number one thing you need to avoid in your life is milk, and that's your favorite, and so you don't know, but you're living everything else as healthy as possible. Wouldn't that that be a bummer to find out in the end of your days you're dying 40 years early, and all you would have had to do was give up milk. That would have been a hard one to choke down. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, and like Craig and I chat about this like hours and hours on end, and it's really, really fascinating because like some of the things that you just sort of touched on now are kind of going to lead me to what I was thinking about speaking to you or asking you about. So or even just talking about myself. So I've also actually done the 23andMe genetic testing, and for me it was fascinating and also really like quite eye-opening. Like the one thing that has come out is, for me personally, is that I'm quite highly susceptible to Alzheimer's, like quite a high percentage more than the average, and there was a few other things too. So you almost like you need to be in the right place to accept the results, or to at least understand them, you know what I mean? So it can be quite daunting opening that email that they send you and seeing what your results are. And then the other thing was like, actually there's a lady called Dr. Rhonda Patrick. I'm not sure if you've heard of her, but she has a really great website, and she's like next level when it comes to this sort of knowledge. And you can actually put your 23andMe results in there, and they go into even more detail. Although you kind of need to kind of explained in layman's terms, because it's almost too much to sort of comprehend. And then the other thing was, I was just literally having a chat to my sister before we were going to talk to you, and she was like, "Oh, I've just gone and had like vegan scrambled eggs for breakfast." I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's cool. Like, what did you have?" You know? She's like, "Oh, I had tofu," and I'm like, "Okay, well, that's not necessarily the right thing, you know. Soy these days, the type of soy that you might get, say, in America is, or in the general sort of public, is not necessarily the right sort of soy. It's like been manufactured, and over the years the genetics of it has changed, and it's been known to cause a lot of cancers, especially breast cancers in women. So, you know, and then it like, she was like, "Okay, well, what can I now have for breakfast if I don't have eggs, and I can't have soy, and I can't have all these things?" So, you know, like, first of all, what's like, do you now have for breakfast, and what advice sort of would you give my sister who's kind of on that path to looking to go sort of vegan?
Well, first of all, you get used to different patterns. It's one thing to realize that bacon and eggs are only a breakfast food because they were marketed to be that. They actually brought in like the best marketer, the best advertising guy in the world to make bacon a breakfast food so they could increase sales. So everything that you think, "Oh, that's a breakfast food," it's only because that's what they want you to think. So kind of breaking those constructs is step number one. I still do. My husband used to make the best breakfast sandwiches with eggs and bread and all of this stuff, and he was just so good at the sandwiches that was the part that I missed the most. But we just got back from our favorite little vegan place, Cafe Gratitude, and they have the best. They call all their foods are named like nurtured, and you don't get a coffee, you get the courageous. and so I got the nurtured burrito, and it's like a vegetable scramble inside. I don't know, they use some sort of cashew cream and stuff like that. It's my favorite thing in the world. It's our favorite part of Sundays, really. But yeah, so just kind of try different things to adapt. Tempeh is a good thing because it's got a fermentation process that basically takes away the negative aspects of a soy-based food. So that, and then finding the replacements. So figure out the little things like avocado toast is something I eat for breakfast sometimes, or veggie scrambles, or even a salad. Like, why can't you eat a salad for breakfast? You know? And so one of my favorite things is there's these little wraps that are very healthy, and I like to put almond butter and a sweet potato on it, and I kind of make a little wrap in the morning, and it's delicious. So yeah, you've got to replace things one by one. It's easier for me than going cold tofu. I'm not going to say cold turkey because, yeah.
Oh, classic. Craig, just so you know, bud, your video has disappeared.
I can tell you is the second thing I was going to tell you though is if you feel like if you know that you have a higher chance of Alzheimer's, you need to read the book How Not to Die. It's probably the best thing you'll ever do for your life because there are a lot of foods linked to Alzheimer's. Meat is a huge part of it, and just by decreasing certain foods, you can decrease your ability to get Alzheimer's by like 50%. It's insane. Or actually, I think it's even up to 80. So what we don't realize right now is that a lot of these diseases that we think are just genetic are completely stoppable. You can prevent them 100%, most of them. You just have to be informed. So that would be the first book that I tell people to read. It goes into everything, and you don't need to read the whole book. You can find the Alzheimer's section and just read that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's Dr. Michael Greger, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Greger is my favorite. Everything he says. I research everybody. Like I got really into the Plant Paradox, which was a trending book this year. And I changed my diet, and then I started to research things, and now I don't believe in him anymore.
You know what's so classic, right? This is literally, so anyone that's like listening, I'm showing the Plant Paradox book here. Someone sent me this book. I have no idea. Someone sent it to me like for my birthday or something like that, and I still have no idea who it was. And whoever it was, I really appreciate it. Thank you. But my first thing, like I started reading it, and I was like, none of this stuff really kind of makes much sense to me. You know, it's like almost the opposite to what I've been reading and researching recently. So the first thing I did is I went to Dr. Michael Greger's website because he like he's the same, you know, I think of him the same as you. Like he's the go-to guy because of the research and that he does. And he literally, I mean, he takes the guy apart. He gets, you know, he has a lot of people that take him apart for doing that as well. But it's so, yeah, it's really fascinating that you mentioned that because I was literally just reading it the other day.
Anything I've fact-checked with Dr. Greger has come out pristine, but yeah, that video, he summed up everything I had a problem with, like that section that says, you know, I gave people eggs and their cholesterol levels actually went down. You're like, oh my gosh, mind blown. What is this? And I dive into things thinking they're possible and then slowly like work my way out of it. So I made the Plant Paradox changes to my diet and then fact checked, and it didn't hold up, unfortunately. And like the Dr. Greger mentions in that video that the study about those eggs, when you look into, okay, who funded this study? It was the egg industry. It's like, really? Come on now.
Yeah.
So those are the things you kind of got to watch out for. But I read that book. I thought it was good while I was reading it.
Yeah, it's classic. And it's so, but this
Gareth and I actually discuss that often as well.
Go back.
No, I was just going to say, we discussed it so often. It's exactly what you just said there, Melissa, is that I think experimentation is important, generally speaking. And you have to read something, research it, give it a try it out, see how you're feeling as well. And it's not just all theoretical. So I think that you're doing that is really, really cool, actually, because I think it's the one way to actually test something is to experiment with stuff. And I think that's really healthy. But also, I think in biology, as we're discussing this kind of thing, I think in biology, it's always super complex. It's not always easy to come to sort of one answer because, you know, I know a lot of vegans who tend to eat way too much refined carbohydrate, which has also been proven to be really, really bad for you, too much sugar. And so, you know, that's another example of you have to try and look at the bigger picture, really like go deep into these things and understand the bigger picture, not just, okay, I've cut meat out, now I'm healthy. There is going to be necessarily lots more to it than, because sometimes there's a scenario where you gain something and you lose something else. So I just think that's just something for people to always just remember, you know.
a lot of people go in and they're like, okay, well then I'll look for everything that says vegan in the grocery store. If it says vegan in the grocery store, it's processed. So you got to limit your processed food as much as possible. And it's a learning process, which is why I think if people are planning to go, unless they do have a life emergency, then it's not really a problem to take the baby steps and do the replacement method. Because if you don't, then you're going to hate it immediately. And so I don't even go to any of the middle aisles. I go to the produce section and then I go and get like my almond milk and like come back around. But yeah, it's interesting too though, because my husband's father is quite old. He's as old as my grandparents. And he, first of all, had 7 bypasses 2 years ago, which is a big deal, but he's also got a lot of nerve damage in his arms. And my husband is so active. He was on American Ninja Warrior. He does handstands and all this stuff all the time. And he was losing feeling in his left arm, like a nerve thing. And if you've ever had like a part of your body numb, it feels weird to where it almost feels like it hurts when you can't feel it. And it was really bothering him for a while. And so I had a whole section on nerve damage and how meat contributes to that. And so he's like, well, okay. And he went vegan a little bit after me. And he's like, okay, I'm going to try it the right way. I'm doing everything right. And he has all of the nerve damage in his arms cleared up completely since he's been vegan. So he's a big advocate too. And kind of the poster child, like people are like, well, how do I build muscle? He looks like a little, like not really a bodybuilder. He's lean, like a gymnast, but he's got a lot of muscle as a vegan. So a lot of things are just misconceptions.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, I think this is something like we could go really deep into, but you know, that's time for like another chat, that's for sure. Just to kind of bring it back a little bit, and you know, I once again, I don't want to harp on this because there's lots of exciting stuff to talk about in your life. But there was also a time in your life when you were in quite a difficult relationship. You had a boyfriend, and he was quite manipulative, and he was kind of bordering on sociopath, which was also another tough time for you. Can you just explain a little bit about him, so we can put a bit of context around that story?
Yeah, so I had just moved back from Hawaii and decided to stay with my mom in Palm Desert, which she moved there after I graduated high school. So it was never a hometown, but it's where I can go to stay in this weird kind of little, if you know anything about it, it's like there's a lot of old people there. People go there to retire. It's also where they have the Coachella Music Festival. But it's really hot. And so a lot of the people that are there are seasonal and they go back to Canada or some colder state in the summer and come in for the winter. So I'm there and whenever I'm visiting my mom, I like to go and work instead of at a coffee shop. I like to go to hotels because first of all, the Wi-Fi is free. A lot of the times it's fast. You can sit out by the pool and there's normally really good happy hours. And so I was sitting at a hotel and I ended up meeting this guy. And he seemed too good to be true. He dressed really nice. He drove a Benz. He bought all my drinks. And he was just like laughing and seemed very not bothered by anything, which is something I've strived to be. We hit it off immediately. And we were dating for a while. And I quickly realized that things were a little bit off. But at this time, I think even though I felt like a strong person, I wasn't. I had not dealt with a lot of things. And I have kind of a pattern of falling into groups and just like, okay, this is what you guys are doing, becoming best friends immediately and just kind of adapting to their lifestyle, which is why so much of my life is so compartmentalized. It's like, oh, this was that time where I was that kind of Melissa. And then here I was this Melissa. And it just doesn't seem like it flows as well as other people's, but it's because I was in a new place with a new group. And so at this time, I was planning to move back to San Diego, but ended up staying in town for a while. And he would stay at resorts and say that he was getting his carpet redone. And so one time we went back to his house and it turned out it was his mom's house. And so I'm just kind of picking up on these little things. I'm like, you don't actually have a house, do you? How are you staying at resorts all the time? But he had this eBay business. And so I learned a lot about buying and selling jewelry. And so he had a pretty good front for it because he would buy jewelry online. And then he would I was helping him upload these things to eBay and things like that, and I saw that the eBay account had made 100 grand one month, and he was making a lot of money. So I was like, okay, this is why you're staying in resorts. I don't know why you don't have your own place, but whatever. Then I start figuring out that he's cheating on me, and it was just like this kind of emotional roller coaster. He's cheating on me with a married mom that was also a prostitute, and he helped her install cameras at her house so she'd be safe while she was hooking. I could not understand.
Wow.
And so at that point, I was like, I need to get out of here. Like something is going on. And we were also staying in hotels with casinos all the time, and he was just gambling away. So even though he was making 100 grand, he'd go to a 5-play machine that was video poker. That was his thing, video poker, and be betting like $100 a hand. But he'd win a lot, and he'd throw money at me, so I'd go do my own thing. And so finally I couldn't take it anymore. And there was like kind of this emotional struggle because I'm like, I sort of like part of the lifestyle, but I feel like shit all the time. So I went to Hawaii for a month. And while I was there, he ended up saying, well, my mom gave me some money to get my business up off the ground because he basically gambled away all the profits. And before we were going to pawn shops, and he was pawning it instead of waiting for it to sell on eBay because eBay shut down his account. So instead of making 20 grand on something, he'd make 1,000 because it's a pawn shop, and it was insane. So when I come back, we got together. He did seem like he was doing a little bit better. But what I had realized right before I left was that he was actually addicted to meth. And I only noticed it when he couldn't afford it anymore, because that was why he was so nonchalant. But at one point he had given me a book called The Mastery of Love that was all about finding your own happiness. So I made excuses for him for those reasons. He gave me this book. It kind of explained his mentality. His dad died right after I met him, so I made excuses for a lot of the things that he did. And yeah, and so I come back. He's supposedly better. Then I could tell something's up. He gets a hotel again, and then we're leaving to go to breakfast the next morning, and we get arrested. I have no idea what's going on. There's stolen property in the car, and so I was booked on like receiving stolen property or something like that. And I'm not going to tell my mom, who worked at a church at the time, and my stepdad was a retired police officer at this point, so I was just humiliated. So I sat it out. Meanwhile, he gets a good lawyer immediately, gets out, and goes straight to rehab. So I'm just sitting it out, waiting to get out on my own recognizance. But if I had missed the deadline, there was like a weekend right before, and then like people in line, so it took about 7 days. I'm sitting in there just kind of doing what I always do, making friends to the point that when I got out, I actually put money in somebody else's like commissary account that I had made friends with, because I was like, I'm going to be a good human. And so the next 2 years was a lot of finding out exactly had happened. And since he was in rehab and going through the 12-step program, he was very honest about a lot of things. And you'd think I would have just hated him right then, but I felt alone, and I couldn't really talk to anybody about it. And if I talked to my mom, she was just like, I told you so. We've always hated that guy. But I don't know. I needed something more than that. And he had experienced it with me, even though it was his fault. So I found out that when his dad was alive, his dad was a legitimate businessman, and he did loans, and he also did have, I think he had a part of a hand in the jewelry business. That's not officially clear to me. But my boyfriend at that time had access to what they called the MLS reports, which is basically, if you're in real estate, it's like, okay, this person lives here and is gone from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So you know when to go and show the house, and they're all just have these lock boxes, or they don't live here. So since he knew about jewelry, he'd just drive his Benz straight to the driveway and then get bolt cutters, and he'd hide the bolt cutters in his pants, go clip the lockbox, bring the lockbox back to his car, get a screwdriver, and jimmy out the key. Then he was just a guy in a nice suit driving a Benz walking into a house that was for sale. So the only reason he even got caught is because he started to run out of meth. And instead of and he was gambling away everything that he made from this, stealing people's lives, everything in their lives, and getting a few $1,000s for it at a pawn shop. And then he couldn't afford drugs. And so he would get his drug dealer to come and meet at these houses, and he would just go take pockets of jewelry, and his drug dealer would take the TV or something like that. And so throughout the next year, I'm finding out a lot of stuff. Like, I had bought a brand new car before I moved back to California from Texas. And it was this really awesome 2008 Jeep Liberty. The top was a soft top. It was the closest you could get to a convertible SUV. So the whole top would scrunch back. Well, one day I had fallen asleep and woke up, and he was like, I have something to tell you. Your car was broken into. Somebody slashed the top. I find out a year later that he had taken the car because his car was a small little Mercedes-Benz, and he was trying to get the TV for his drug dealer and locked himself out of my car. And so instead of calling AAA and leaving what he wanted to steal there, he got like a $200 TV and slashed my $30,000 car. And so, yeah, I found out things like that. And so then the next year was very difficult because I paid about $5,000 for an attorney. Everything kept getting pushed back. The court date was constantly pushed back, and I moved away to LA to just get away this time. And so I kept having to take the Greyhound back to go to court dates. And he had a really expensive attorney. So what ended up happening is my attorney didn't show up most of the time, and his attorney would fill in for mine, which is a complete, like, it's not supposed to happen that way, a conflict of interest. And so what ended up happening was that I was presented with a situation where, first of all, there was some evidence against me. He was cheating on me with somebody who looked oddly like me, and while I was gone, my mom was watching my dog, and he had asked to go pick up my dog. So he brings my dog with him into some of these houses, and sometimes he's staying in a house that nobody lives in that still has furniture to be shown and whatever for a few days. And so some of the houses, they found dog poop. It was my dog. And 2 people saw a blonde girl. But these dates were when I was in Hawaii. So if we had gone to actual trial and not made a deal, then I could have just gotten out of it completely. They'd called this like the largest burglary ring or something in this area, and it was that they knew of for sure. It was over 40 houses that he had robbed.
Wow.
And so it was millions of dollars. It kind of set me off onto a new life. And so it's hard to really diagnose a sociopath, but I believe he was. There were people standing up in court that day. This woman, I guess he took a safe and a box that was on her nightstand. And her son died in the war in Afghanistan, I believe. And she went up and told her story. And he had taken not only everything that was of value to her by her father that had died, but also took whatever it was with like the locket of hair, the only thing she had left from her son. It was a locket of hair and his tags, his military tags. And I can picture it. He probably just had it and threw it away. It was like sifted for the gold and the diamonds and then tossed that like it was nothing. And I'm in there just bawling. And all I wanted to do was stand up and say, you guys need to know the real story, but you can't. You didn't take it to trial. So those people just assume whatever they assume about me, which is kind of a hard thing to grapple with. He had that really good attorney, and then he went straight to rehab. And because of his rehab, he got time served. So he never got jail time for that crazy amount of stuff. But he got 2 strikes. And then I moved to LA to get away from him officially. I was like, I can't even be in this town. And then one day I get a knock at the door, and he's followed me there. Not only followed me, he somehow figured out, like he saw me on social media check in somewhere, and then followed me from there to my house, and then knocked on or started leaving gifts on my doorstep. And he would just leave cash or something weird. One time he left a CD case with no CD and just $800 inside, and with like a little note with like the nickname he used to call me. And I'm like, I literally am in another relationship now. This is creepy. Because he threw a brick through my windshield, terrified my roommate, climbed in my window one time and kissed her on the forehead thinking it was me. So creepy things. Wow. And but then he ended up going to jail. Now to this day, he's been in jail for the last 7 years. I think he's got a 9-year sentence.
Well, the stuff that you've been through, these stories, I mean, it's quite incredible, the kind of stuff that you've had to deal with over the years. And I guess, as you were saying earlier, that's part of how you got to where you are now. All these lessons you've learned, and being through, well, you name any number of these things that you've been through would be hard for anyone, but I guess it has helped you to become a strong individual, and you've definitely had to learn to deal with stuff. So obviously there was a turning point in your life, and you made these big strides forward, and you really wanted to make big changes in your life. Tell us a little bit about where you're at now. I mean, you've got some really interesting stuff going on. You, apart from being a yogi or yoga, or studying to be a yoga teacher, Reiki healer, you've got an awesome podcast. I'd love to hear a bit more about some of the stuff that you're busy with now after getting through all this stuff, and sort of where you look to head towards in the future.
Well, when I finally was rid of this person in LA, I decided to do yoga teacher training. So I'd gotten into yoga in Texas, but wasn't as into it as I am now. It was kind of a slow progression. I would go back and forth from yoga or the gym. But that's why I think it's just so important to really pay attention to who you surround yourself with, and the quality of your energy, because you can see a very distinct downward spiral. Each story gets a little bit worse. And so when I found yoga teacher training, it felt like home, because I started going to this yoga studio, and everyone is so open-armed and loving, and their habits are healthy but still fun, and so I got really into it. And so I started to little bits of progress. At that time, I still was very much suffering from my eating disorder, but that was actually the first catalyst for me to start seeking help, because suddenly there's a cognitive dissonance on what you believe and what you're doing with your life. And so every little section, I can definitely not blame the other people, but I can blame myself for for falling into habits, and then anything else that comes after that, when my energy is at a low, that's what I'm attracting in my life. And so, of course, I was going to attract somebody like that. I was at a low point, and I wouldn't let myself see it, and I was just partying away all the feelings. And so when I started to feel the little bits of progress from my new yoga friends, and I was still partying, and I have nothing against partying, actually, but in a healthy way. You've got to figure out your limits and whatever, but it's always fun to have a good time. But so when I started doing yoga and making these little changes, then suddenly I had to kind of change my eating, and I kept trying. And so I tried, and then I educated myself. And that's the first step I always go. I educate myself, or I try to help others through it. So because that really makes you see it from an objective standpoint, and your excuses stop working. And so when I made those changes, and I started really getting into the effects of the mind like that, these really deep ingrained habits that change your brain composition. It changes your initial reaction. So they stop being something that you control that easily. And so you have to start controlling your natural instinct, and it's got to be different. And so I did so much research. I read 47 books last year. In the last 5 years, I've probably read, I don't know how many hundreds, but somebody just inspired me to count my books last year, and it's 47.
Wow.
And I remember things really well, and I'm able to find the common denominators. So I started making all these life changes, and then it's crazy how fast progress happens, and it's kind of an exponential curve, and so it goes very slow, and then all of a sudden things just start going up for the best. And when I met my husband, we bonded over the fact that, first of all, we never wanted to get married, because that's what I'm saying, and we're like, me too. But we bonded over the book The Power by Rhonda Byrne, which is the sequel to The Secret, which most people have heard of. And we just kind of bonded over this positive energy thing. And I was still hanging out with somebody who was sort of a little negative succulent there. And the contrast was huge. And so when I started spending all my time with him, and we were bonding over these positive things, then growth just started like crazy. And we're able to just read something and kind of adapt it into our lives, and read something else and adapt it into our lives. And I'm so proud of certain things in my life now. Just looking back, it wasn't that long ago that everything was wrong, and now everything is right. And people have told me that I'm an inspiration, and people have said like, wow, you've changed so much. Like there's still, yes, you're still you. There's still that part that was always shining through, but my whole life is different now, and I have to thank doing the work. You've got to do the work. You can't just be like, oh, my life is shit and blame everything around you. The moment that you take responsibility for everything in your life, that's when change starts to happen. If all I did was blame my ex for that, then what growth can actually happen? That you're going to get used to blaming everybody else in your life for everything that happens to you. There's no point at all in figuring out what other people did wrong in a situation that caused you to do something. Unless that is that, okay, well, next time somebody does something like that, I'm going to react this way and not that way. Or I'm going to take a stand for what it's right. I'm going to be the person that stands up. And when I notice something, I'm not going to pass it off and make an excuse for it. I'm going to do something different. And so the reason that I started my podcast is because I had so much that I had learned, so much that I started to just share with people. And I was excited to share these big aha moments in my life that I needed an outlet for it. And so, because of my extreme personal experience, as I like to call it, I can just relate to that many more people. Like, I know what it's like to get a DUI. I know how to talk to people who are in crisis mode with suicide because I volunteered at the Suicide and Crisis Counseling Center to get myself over that hurdle. I volunteered at the Rape Center and was the person that people came to, and I'd hold their hands as they were getting swabbed and feeling violated again. And yeah, I've made the changes and I've done the work. And so my goal is just to be the least judgmental person I know, because I know what it to make decisions that everyone else thinks are crazy, and to somehow be able to find the logic in it, and to tell yourself that it's not the worst decision you've ever made. And so I know those things. And so I can relate to a lot of different experiences, and I know I feel like I know what's needed in a lot of them. There's still plenty that I don't know, but you just have to stay open-minded and listen to other people's stories and see what you can take from those, instead of always taking the hard way and having to learn yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I'm just kind of like sitting back here going, whoa, what a colorful, what a interesting, what a challenging, an amazing kind of life, you know, and just well done for getting in the place that you are now. You're a sort of shining example and an inspiration. Like it's really amazing. What sort of can, you know, you've obviously got your podcast now, which people must really, really go and listen to. Like, first of all, it sounds awesome. Like, your editing is fantastic. So well done on that. And just the structure around it. And you speak so well, really articulately and really clearly and smoothly. And you're nice to listen to. So we really urge people to go and have a listen to that, because once again, it's you going into more detail on your experiences and speaking to other people of their experiences too, all sort of health related. So, and obviously mind, body, everything that sort of encapsulates that. What can we expect from you in the future, and where are things going for you?
Well, with the podcast, one of my goals is to kind of bridge the gap, because when I was finding all this stuff, I had to really dive into yoga and hear all this woo-woo stuff with chakras and crystals, and a lot of it seemed far out there, and I'm kind of more of a logical mind. So I wanted to bridge that gap of mindfulness for people, for the everyday person that might not be there, and maybe find the science towards those weirder things, that to bring them back to reality and make a practical use of them. And I was saying to someone earlier that part of the reason I like to spend so much time on the editing, I like to think of it as like kind of packaging it up as a gift for the universe, because my dad didn't leave me something, you know. He had one notebook that said, I was like, oh my gosh, he's going to have writings from when he was in the hospital. And I looked inside and it just said, "Dear God, comma." And, you know, on one hand, it was very profound. It's like a cry for help because he didn't want to die. But on the other hand, I'm like, what about dear Melissa? Like, you didn't think to write me anything. You didn't properly write your will. All of this stuff. It's like, what about me? Like, I was your only daughter. And so now I look at it as kind of like this little package, something to leave. If something happened to me, I've got this little thing I created packaged in like a beautiful little bow, you know, making it immersive, making it connect with people. So that's really my goal with it. And where I want to take it is eventually, in about a year, I give myself, I'm very on top of my goals. So I have no doubt these are going to happen. But I want to start having kind of interactive retreats around the same topics where it's just kind of a whole mind, body wellness for the everyday person retreat where they can go and work on their stuff and find creative outlets to work through things and kind of connect with other people. And eventually you will see my viral TED Talk because that is my number one life goal is to do a viral TED Talk, one of the most viewed or most inspiring. So I joined Toastmasters. It was part of my New Year's resolution. So I'll be working on my speaking skills to build to that. And yeah, that's where you can find me. Mindlove.com.
That's really awesome. I think I love the idea of bridging a gap. You know, I think by talking to people like this is part of what Gareth and I believe in as well, is bridging a gap between people, but you can also bridge a gap between ideas and concepts for people, and I think that's really, really valuable. And we love those ideas. I think speaking in front of people, inspiring people, I think you will be really good at that. You really have got an interesting story, and yeah, we really look forward to seeing some more of that. And we can see how driven and focused you are, and we have no doubt that you'll get there, you know, just by chatting to you. So we, like Gareth said, we really urge people to have a listen because it really is valuable, and it's nice to be able to not have such massive polarizing ways of discussing it. You just go in there as a very sort of a normal person that has been through something and can articulate it well, and I think that's very easy for lots of people to get. So thank you for that, and thank you so much for taking the time for just opening up to us and sharing such an interesting story. And so thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun, and I know that my story is kind of a roller coaster. It's almost like, wait, that happened right after this? Like, that's why my mom told me before, you should write a book, and I was like, I don't know how much sense the book's gonna make. People are just gonna wonder if I made the whole thing up. Like, I've got all the photos to prove it, so maybe it'll be a picture book.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And so besides the podcast and your website, where's best for people to get in touch with you?
You know, they can find me on all of the social media platforms. You can Mindlove or Melissa is my personal one. But really, I've been spending most of my time on the podcast and just funneling everything through there. It's been almost therapeutic in a way, and it's my favorite part of the day, connecting with other people, hearing their stories, which I'm sure you guys can relate to. Like every new interview you've made, or maybe two in this one since there's two of you, and you can just kind of help each other. That's really one of the biggest things I'm focusing on this year is just giving back to people and connecting with them. I really love my network right now, and just seeing how you can help each other instead of just seeing what you can take. So yeah, that's what I'm focusing on right now, is just the podcast and seeing how to give back to this amazing, beautiful universe.
Mm-hmm. That's such a nice thing to say. And we just wanted, Craig has already said his thank yous, and I'd just like to say thank you from my side as well. I mean, you certainly are ridiculously human when it comes to your story and who you are, and we just really appreciate you for being so open, honest, and candid about your life experiences, and it's so nice of you just to share them in that open way, because it is so important for people to hear stories like this and things like this, and no doubt there'll be people that will be able to relate, and people that you'll help, not necessarily through your stories, but maybe just because you were honest about it. Do you know what I mean? So we're super thankful for that. And it's been really fascinating chatting to you. I know there's there's actually so many stories which we haven't even gone into. You have such a cool story where you gate crashed George Clooney's birthday, and you kind of got kicked out of it because you were the 151st person at the dinner table when there was only space for 150. And that's a brilliant story in itself. But
yeah,
but we will make sure
we can do a part 2.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So,
yeah, because it's just weird talking to Barbara Streisand when Secret Service kicks you out of a party. That happened to me. So
yeah, I know. Once again, like you said, that book, people are not going to believe you. They're going to be like, this chick is bonkers. She's just made stuff up. So we just wanted to say thank you so much. We wish you all the best with absolutely everything, and it's been really, really cool chatting to you. You're actually our first American in America that we've chatted to, so that's really, really cool for us as well. It's like a big milestone, and we can't wait to launch this episode because there's so much cool stuff in it. So thank you.
And we look forward to seeing you at the event in July.
Yeah.
Oh yes, podcast movement.
Yeah.
I look forward to it as well.
Yeah, then we can do
Maybe
part 2.
Maybe I'll just crash it.
Yeah, there you go.
If they mail you your badges ahead of time, send me a photo of it so I can just laminate one.
There we go.
Oh, classic. Cool. Well, that's so cool. Well, yeah, I mean, thanks very much. It's really good.
Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Have an awesome Sunday.
Have a great Sunday.
Thanks for all your time, man. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.